Okay, part three, Jack London, Call of the Wild. Yeah, and so what I'm going to talk about now, it figures into that second discussion that you were doing about the question was something like this. Does this mean it really is all about embracing the primitive to survive, or is there room in London's universe for qualities associated with civilization, like love, compassion, shared goals, and cooperation? Okay, so that's what we'll talk about now in part three. And yeah, I mean, just to pick up on a point I was making last time, a very real product of civilization, the man in the red sweater was the most awful in the book, perhaps the most awful. Whereas the most thoroughly decent, Thornton, was the most utterly primitive. Okay, I mean, remember, he's just watching Mercedes and Hal, and just shaking his head and saying, "Survival of the fittest," right? Do you guys know? Just a quick side note here. Do you know about the Darwin Awards? They come out every year, right? In other words, thank you, by the way, for doing something so stupid you've taken yourself out of the gene pool so that you won't reproduce and pass down your stupidity to subsequent generations. All right, Darwin Awards, right? I'll see if I can find a link to it if I remember, and I'll send it to you. Just Google it. Just Google Darwin Awards and you'll see it. One of my favorites, yeah, I'm going down a rabbit hole. One person that won the Darwin Award one year he was a robber. Showed up at a bank or a convenience store or something, and he stuck a gun in the attendant's face and said, "Your money or your life." And the guy said, "No, I'm not going to give you my money. To hell with you, right?" So he pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger. And well, guess what? Nothing came out. It went click. So guess what Mr. Darwin Award winner did? Took a look down the barrel and pulled the trigger again. And that time, the gun worked. I shouldn't be laughing. I mean, this is dark comedy, right? But you get it, That time, his gun worked. So he's dead, right? So he wins a Darwin Award. He's not going to reproduce and pass his stupidity on to subsequent generations, right? So that's how it works. So you see, John Thornton is looking at Hal and Mercedes and saying, you just gotta let people like that do what they're gonna do. Let them make their own mistakes. That's part of the law of the jungle, right? And sure enough, they all die. And, John Thornton is hardly gonna bat an eyelash over that. He's seen people like that come and go in the Yukon for quite a long time. So yeah, he understands the forces of primitivism, but he also understands love. So is the upshot then that love really does, after all, have a place in the primitive, that out there in nature, that loyalty and decency and cooperation, things that we associate with civilization, really maybe have much more of a home out in nature than we might typically give it credit for? After all, take a good long look at civilization, our own right now, or Jack London's, or any other period going all the way back to Rome. And, people in the name of civilization have done some really, 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 really disgusting and stupid and cruel things, okay? So, and this is what I think is so great about this book. It really asks these fundamental questions about who we are as humans, what civilization ultimately is, and what all of nature ultimately is. So, the book really does tap into those eternal verities, these eternal truths, I think. Okay, so Okay, well, just a little bit of scholarship here then. There's a scholar of naturalism, probably the most well known, or one of the most well known over the years, a man named Donald Pizer. And he's a scholar of naturalism. And for years, he's tried to redeem naturalism and say, no, it's not all about nasty, hopeless forces of nature and there's no free will and just, whatever. In other words, trying to say there's more to naturalism than that. He says that even though character types argues that even through the character types like Buck, their yearning, their desire for something more, it's that proves there's a redemptive worldview. And as we'll see in Maggie, the next book, I won't give away the ending, but the titular character, Maggie, she, how can I say this without giving anything away? I'll just put it this way. She has a hard life. But even in Maggie, you see this incredible desire, this wonderful, even redemptive desire for something more, this yearning, to transcend. And, Donald Pizer is saying, when you look at works in naturalism, you cannot overlook that it's real. There's something deeply humane in there. Okay. So, and another thing too, just getting into some biographical criticism, this is going to blow you all away. You'd think that this book is just, this incredible howl or yelp. This nice dog metaphor here, for individual power and strength and individuality, and just set me free from the confines of civilization like Buck. That's when I can be true and free and, on and true to my nature and free and really know what liberty is about and all that sort of stuff. Seems like an incredible howl for good old American individualism. Maybe, but ready for this? I think I'm going to say something that's about to maybe blow a few of y'all's minds out there. Ready for this? Jack London was a socialist. Not kidding. Jack London was a socialist. And now we hear that word and a lot of folks, it's just like one of the dirtiest words you can call somebody in America today. It would seem that way sometimes. But socialism has been a strain in American thinking, and I do mean American thinking going back over 100 years. That one thing that we can do, and we talked about this in labor with the labor movements earlier on, that labor unions would come together because there is a recognition that yes, you do have these overarching horrible forces of capitalism that would seem to crush us. Think Hugh Wolf, right? But if we can just lock arms, bond with one another, lock arms, and get ourselves all to point in the same direction together, think about what all of us working together can accomplish. All right. That's the thinking behind labor unions. And what I just said is probably starting to resonate with something from this book, right? All the dogs working together. They're all in the harnesses together, all pulling towards a common goal. Okay? I think it's in places like that you see some signs of socialist thought coming out in Jack London's book here. But yes, Jack London was a socialist, which means that we do need to be able to practice these qualities, not just practice them, but develop them, even institutionalize them. These qualities that we do often associate with civilization, and that is cooperation. That is working towards common goals. Okay, so that's another thing there. look over on page 30 for perhaps some sign of that. Okay, this is chapter 3, about 7 pages into chapter 3. I'm going to look at that paragraph. It begins with the phrase, "It was inevitable that the clash for leadership would come." That's a whole sentence. Okay, that's where I'm going to read. Skip down a couple lines. Okay. He had been gripped tight by that nameless, incomprehensible pride of the trail and trace, that pride which holds dogs in the toil to the last gasp, which lures them to die joyfully in a harness and breaks their hearts if they are cut out of the harness. So you see, there seems to be this, in other words, the civilized quality of cooperation. It seems for London to be rooted in the primitive. There's this primitive desire to want to bond together and work towards this common goal and give this common goal everything you got. Okay? There's some socialistic thinking coming out here, folks. Yes, you're working for yourself. You're going to do the absolute best you can, but it's for a common goal. It's for a common goal. Okay. This was the pride of Dave as wheel dog, of Solex as he pulled with all his strength, the pride that laid hold of them at break of camp, transforming them from sour and sullen brutes into straining, eager, ambitious creatures. Okay. That common goal draws them and brings out the best in them. Okay, and then over on page 58, this is in that same section where you saw Mercedes being hysterical, in scare quotes. Yeah, this is very end of chapter 5, very end, last page. And so, yeah, I mean, here's John Thornton, again, as primitive as they come. He's a real mountain man out here. And, it's just like, I've seen idiots like this my whole life. Let them just learn the hard way, win a Darwin Award, goodbye. So it seemed in his best interest just to ignore these knuckleheads, right? But look at what he does, right? If you strike that dog again, I'll kill you. See? John has nothing to gain from sticking his neck out for that dog. And in fact, as I'm scratching my neck here, I think my neck's okay. He has nothing to gain. And in fact, he doesn't know if they're armed. They might pull a gun on him and shoot him. He's outnumbered. And he's been injured. He's got something wrong with I think he had frostbite on his feet. So he's really, this is one of the qualities of love, right? Self-sacrifice. You're willing to sacrifice your own well-being for the good of another when you yourself stand to gain nothing from it. That's a textbook definition of love. And John, the wild, primitive mountain man, is capable of doing that. This is really awesome, folks. It really is. Okay. And then over on page 59, last sentences of the chapter. And then a whole section of ice gave way and the dogs and humans disappear. So yeah, they won the Darwin Award in the Yukon, okay? A yawning hole was all that was to be seen. The bottom had dropped out of the trail. It's almost funny. I think it's supposed to be, right? John Thornton and Buck looked at each other like, did you just see that? They're like probably laughing to themselves or something. You poor devil, said John Thornton, and Buck licked his hand. So that love has just been sealed there. This is a wonderful, beautiful passage. And no, I'm not glad that those guys drowned, but you get it. Okay, then over on page 61, this is the second page of chapter 6. So see what's going on here, right? You know, to be a good leader doesn't mean you're a bully, like the man in the red sweater, okay? Or a brute or a selfish brute, right? Being a good leader, and again, this is the stuff of the primitive too. Being a good leader means that you show love to those that you're leading. And a number of you commented on this in the post. That was good. You show love, okay? You show care for their welfare. This man had saved his life, which was something. But further, he was the ideal master. You know, and this guy didn't come from some bastion of civilization, Harvard University or this or that. It's a guy that came from the wild. So again, kindness, cooperation, love does appear to be the stuff of the primitive also. Maybe even more so than from civilization itself. Other men saw to the welfare of their dogs from a sense of duty and business expediency. He saw to the welfare of his as if they were his own children, because he could not help it. So that seems to be something deterministic also, right? If it's determined somehow, if you're fated to have a big heart and be a loving guy, right? That seems to be something that we're just hardwired with in our ancient biology for London. And he saw further. He never forgot a kindly greeting or a cheering word, and to sit down for a long talk with them, gas as he called it, was as much, which was as much his delight as theirs. So yeah, that's John Thornton. And not just John Thornton, that's the primitive too. Okay, that's the primitive. Okay, and then if you look over on page 70, and you see what happens when you lead people with love. Yeah, this really is. This is a wonderful, political scientists could look at this book and try to get a handle on the extent to which love can be worked into social bonds that bring people together. Jack London would seem to suggest that. This is chapter 6, second to last page from chapter 6. And Buck has learned to love Thornton. And as a result, Buck is willing to stick his neck out for, promise I'm not about to start crying. Getting a little choked up. No, I'm good, I promise. So there's this wonderful reciprocity here, right? That Thornton stuck his neck out for Buck. Now look at what Buck is able to do. He's able to stick his neck out for John, and he does it. At one point, he saves his life, and now here he's going to help. He's going to help Thornton win. I don't know how many $6,000 or whatever it is, which back then was a huge pile of money. I think we're talking about probably about $100,000 today, something like that. I mean, it's a lot of money, just all in piles of gold, right? Okay. As you love me, Buck, as you love me, was what he whispered. Buck whined and with suppressed eagerness. So we know what happens there. Buck, with all his incredible strength, pulls this 1,000-pound sled that's rooted down into the ground in the ice, frozen, and he pulls it out and drags it, I think, 100 yards or something like that. Okay, that's love. This isn't force of desire to dominate or control or be a bully or whatever. This is illustrative of the power of love, what love can do, okay? I hope that's enough to warm your hearts a little bit, just a little bit here in the midst of our pandemic. This is the power of love. And it's wonderfully redemptive in this overall very grim work of naturalism, that love has a place here. But then that does raise the question, doesn't it? That, our back itches here. Yeah, okay. Someone loved me, they'd come and scratch my back for me. Oh boy, all right. Okay, so if you look over on page 62, that's not to say that there isn't ultimately an uneasy tension between civilization, quote unquote, and the primitive, quote unquote. As some of you pointed out, and really astutely so, this power of love, if this power of love is really all that, then why is Buck really not fully himself until that chain is broken too? And that's a really good question. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. What a lot of you were saying, I'm glad you're putting good ideas out there and you're conversing with one another in some very positive ways. One bit of consensus that seemed to be emerging is that Buck never completely forgot about John even when he was killed. He would return to that hut, I think it was every year or something like that, to pay his respects. So it's not that love was completely thrown out the window or that love was somehow confining for Buck. You know, as we saw, even before John died, you know, John let Buck run wild and do whatever he wanted and run around and raise hell and do whatever a wild doggy wants to do. And that's exactly what Buck does. And when he returns, hey, Buck, good to see you. And they hang out, and then Buck takes off again. Okay. So, okay. If you look over on page 62, 62, this is, chapter 6, about 3 pages into chapter 6. But in spite of this great love he bore, John Thornton, which seemed to bespeak the soft civilizing influence, the strain of the primitive, which the Northland had aroused in him, remained alive and active. Faithfulness and devotion, things born of fire and roof, were his, but he retained his wildness and wiliness. He was a thing of the wild, come in from the wild to sit by John Thornton's fire, rather than a dog of the soft Southland stamped with the marks of generations of civilization. So it says here that, yes, that it might seem like Buck is living this dual existence, part out in the wild, part in civilization with John. But it does say here, right, that he's a thing of the wild and did what the ancient wolves did before dogs were civilized, which is they kind of wander over by the firelight and say hello and maybe get tossed a piece of meat or something like that. So that didn't make those wolves any less wild. And so I think it would be wrong to say that Buck is not a thing of the wild yet. He does appear to be, at least according to London's description. Okay. And then over on page 86, but even so, even having said all that, there does still seem to be this uneasy tension between those, to the extent that John Thornton is this force of civilization, sort of keeping Buck in check to a degree, and then that desire to really just completely cut free and be completely free of any sort of human interaction. There is still that uneasy tension, and you'd be right to wonder if it's ever completely resolved. Okay, and so we see this on page 86. It was the call, the many noted call, sounding more alluringly and compelling than ever before. So there it is, the title of the book, Call of the Wild. So he's hearing that call. And as never before, he was ready to obey. John Thornton was dead. The last tie was broken. Man and the claims of man no longer bound him. So, yeah, here London seems to be talking about that, connection of love between man and dog in kind of a different way. In that passage, there doesn't seem to be anything to suggest that love is the stuff of the primitive for Buck. It seems to be saying that love is the stuff of humanity, and Buck is finally breaking the bonds even of that and is going and taking off. So honestly, I think this issue of what exactly is civilization, what exactly is wild for Buck, is never 100% completely resolved. So maybe that sounds like a cop-out on my part, but lots of books work like that. They put out these issues and don't solve them for us. It's left up to us to try to puzzle over it. So, okay. So, I guess if there's one way, you can say, all right, Richardson, yeah, that is a little bit of a cop-out. We're looking to you to tell us what the heck's going on. And you're saying, oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm not doing a very good job of being a teacher right there with that. But actually, I do mean that seriously, though. I think London is leaving that to you and to me to try to figure it out. Because I don't think London has it all the way figured out himself. But I will say this, all right? You ready? I will say this in terms of a theme that London is introducing. He's trying to say that the primitive allows for love and goodness, but he's also wanting to say that civilization allows for brutality and evil. So, yeah, and in all those workings, those spheres, there are all kinds of complex tugs and pulls and different vectors developing one way or another. So, all right. I think that's enough out of me. This is part 3, and I don't think I need to talk any more about this as much as I'd love to, but I think I'll stop it right there. And please do, if you're having any questions, any issues that any of this may have raised, and something still feels unresolved, chew on it a little bit. Do a little bit more writing in response to this lecture, or ask me a question, and I'll do my best to chew on it a little bit more. Okay? All right. Well, I'll leave you there. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, okay? And see you soon. All right. Bye-bye.